Today we're going to learn about Stephen F. Austin and the impresarios. How did Anglo settlers come to Texas? Imagine that your parent or guardian asked you to leave your current life and move to a foreign country. Would you be willing to leave your home and your friends? Would you be willing to practice a new religion and learn a new language? Well, maybe not, but what if your parent or guardian was on their deathbed and it was their dying wish that you did this? Would you do it then? That's what happened to Stephen F. Austin. Here's the story. So what did Moses Austin do? Moses Austin was Stephen F. Austin's father. In 1798, Moses Austin moved to Missouri and operated a lead mine there. He lost his money and found himself deeply in debt during the Panic of 1819. He was broke. Now what is he going to do? Well, he comes up with a radical idea to help him rebuild his fortune. Moses Austin was ambitious and he had a plan. He would go to Texas and start a colony. He would sell the land to new settlers who were looking for farmland. But first he had to get permission from Spanish officials. However, Spain's bad experience with filibusters left the Spanish officials kind of suspicious of Anglos from the US. Okay, remember that we had many filibusters we learned about recently, Gutierrez and McGee, and Jean Lafitte, James Long, Philip Nolan, and they all caused various kinds of problems for the Spanish. So they didn't really want Anglos to come and live in Texas. Remember that an Anglo is a white person. So first Moses has to get some supplies. He gets a horse and $50 from his son Stephen. Now $50 was nothing to sneeze at back then. Can you imagine your parent trying to borrow money from you? Then he and his slave Richmond head off for Texas. They traveled 800 miles from Missouri to Texas to get permission from Spanish officials to start a colony. Moses arrived in San Antonio in December of 1820. In San Antonio, he presented a petition to colonize Texas to Governor Antonio Martinez. But Governor Martinez said, no way. Did Moses Austin just give up on his dream? No, he got very lucky. While walking down the streets of San Antonio, dejected after being turned down by Governor Martinez, he happened to meet an old friend named Baron de Bastrop. He told Baron de Bastrop about his plans for a colony in Texas, and the Baron was very excited, and he offered to help. Did Baron de Bastrop help Moses Austin? Baron de Bastrop was friends with the Spanish officials, so he used his influence to get Moses Austin's plan for a new colony approved. Governor Martinez liked the new plan, and it got approved. Did Moses Austin start his colony? He hurried back to Missouri to start recruiting colonists, but his luck ran out. First, he and his slave Richmond were robbed. The robbers stole all their supplies and their horses, so they were forced to walk all the way home. Remember, this is December of 1820, so it was pretty cold. Moses got pneumonia and died. On his deathbed, he asked his son Stephen to carry out his plan of colonizing Texas. Stephen Austin goes to Texas. Stephen Austin was only 27 years old. He had planned to be a lawyer, but he honored his father's last wishes, and in August of 1821 he headed for Texas. First, Austin went to San Antonio and met with Governor Martinez to get his father's land grant legally transferred to his name. In 1821, Mexico won its independence from Spain. How did that affect Austin's colony? Well, this meant that Mexico now ruled Texas, not Spain, so Austin has to travel to Mexico City to get permission from the Mexican officials to continue his colony. It took a year, but the Mexican government finally approved his request. Now, Stephen F. Austin didn't just sit on his backside during that year. He used the time to learn Spanish and to make some friendships with Mexican officials that are going to help him to be successful in his colony. Stephen F. Austin's colony was approved. What did Austin do next? Well, he had to choose a site for his colony, and he better choose wisely or his colony might not be successful. Luckily, Austin chose a good site for his colony. He chose the land between the Brazos and the Colorado rivers. And so here is the Brazos River right here, and here is the Colorado River right here. Now, this was a really good site for the colony because it had lots of water and also had fertile soil for farming. It was not heavily forested, so it was pretty easy for the settlers to clear. Some of the crops that they decided to grow would be cotton, sugarcane, and corn. In 1823, Austin decided to locate the first settlement on the Colorado River. This settlement would be the capital of Austin's colony. It would be called San Felipe de Austin. Here, Austin would build his own home, a dog trot cabin. You notice the dog trot cabin has one space for living on this side, and then kind of covered up by the white. Here, you've got another space for living on this side. And then there's this area in the middle that's open. That's why they call it a dog trot cabin, because dogs could trot through there. And it was really good for in the summer. It would help to have breezes blow through and help to keep the cabin cool. And in the winter, they could hang curtains to kind of enclose the space and make it usable in the winter also. If you wanted to come to Austin's colony, you couldn't be just anybody. You had to meet his character requirements. To qualify as a Texan, Stephen F. Austin wanted the best people for his Texas colony, so he ran newspaper ads which spelled out who should and should not apply. No frontiersmen whose only skill was hunting. No drunkards or gamblers. No profane swearers or idlers. Idlers are lazy people. No suspicious characters, in other words, no criminals. Austin was eager to get skilled artisans and farmers. I preferred to conquer the country with the axe, plow, and hoe. Austin wanted whole families, including women and children. He actually paid more or gave more land to the people who would bring a wife and child or multiple children. And also, if you brought slaves, you got extra land for each slave you brought too. If you happen to be a person who had a rare skill such as blacksmithing or doctoring, you got even more land. Next, Austin traveled to New Orleans to begin recruiting colonists. What kind of people was he looking for? People of good character, people who were willing to be Catholic, who were Catholic or willing to become Catholic, people who could provide for themselves, people who could accept hard times, because it's not going to be easy in Austin's colony, and people who would pledge their loyalty first to Spain and then once Mexico won its independence, Mexico. Because Mexico, when it first started, did not have freedom of religion, people had to be Catholic, or at least say that they'd be Catholic. So Austin starts to choose his settlers. His grant allowed him to bring 300 families to Texas. So his giant piece of land, he got to divide into 300 pieces, and each family got a piece. Those first 300 families to come to Texas are nicknamed the Old 300 because they were the first Anglo families to come and settle in Texas. Remember Jane Long from the Filibusters? She was one of the Old 300. Why did families agree to leave their lives in the U.S. to settle in a foreign land? Cheap land was what attracted most settlers. The land in Texas was much cheaper than land in the United States. Also, all of the good farmland in the U.S. was already taken. The land sold for only 12.5 cents an acre. Now you might say, like, what's a half cent? How could they possibly sell it for half a cent? Well, they would only sell it in even acres. So therefore, it would be like 25 cents for every 2 acres. Land in the U.S. was $1.25 an acre. So land in the U.S. was 10 times more expensive. Just to put it into perspective, Piner is on about 2 acres of land. A man could receive 640 acres for himself, 320 acres more if he had a wife, and 160 acres for each child. So the average family would get at least 1,000 acres. And the other good thing, in the United States, you had to pay cash for your land, and the minimum land purchase was 80 acres. So you had to have $100 in cash, which was very rare for people at that time. But in Texas, if you didn't have the money, you could pay your land out over several years, or you could trade for goods and services that you would provide for the colony. How did things go in the new colony? Well, it wasn't so easy to begin with. It was tough to be a colonist in early Texas. There were attacks by the Karankawa Indians. There was a drought which caused crops to fail. Supplies were difficult to get. Doctors were often scarce in colonial Texas, and some of the colonists died from disease. Also, Austin's ship, the Lively, had trouble finding the colony as well. Some settlers simply gave up and went back to Texas. As you can see from this cartoon of the Indian attacks, the horse says, "If we survive this, you are totally walking home." But when times get tough, the tough get going. Texans are tough. Most of the colonists stayed in Texas and worked hard to make the colony successful. Stephen F. Austin was also a really outstanding leader, and under his leadership, the colony prospered, expanded to 20,000 people. Just to put that into perspective, Sherman, Texas has about 40,000 people today. So all of Texas only had 20,000 people. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but back during this time, it was a lot of people, many more than they had under the Spanish mission system. We also had some towns grow up. San Felipe, of course, was Stephen F. Austin's town. And then the towns of Gonzales and Victoria also sprang up from other empresarios who came to Texas after seeing Stephen F. Austin's success. These other empresarios we'll learn about on another day. The towns of Gonzales and Victoria came from two other successful empresarios, Green DeWitt and Alonzo de Leon.